Lesson 38, Hypothesis Testing Procedure for Two Population Proportions. If we have an idea that makes a comparison between two population proportions, and we want to be able to determine if that idea is valid or not, we need to conduct a hypothesis testing procedure involving those two population proportions for which the comparison was made. In this case, we turn to the following steps to guide us through the hypothesis testing procedure. Hypothesis testing procedures begin with the formation of a hypothesis. Usually this involves a verbal statement. But this verbal statement needs to be expressed in a form that can be tested statistically. So we need to come up with the mathematical expression of the idea. Now this involves selecting the paired forms of HO and H1 that correspond to the stated hypothesis. There are three to choose from. The test is either conducted as HO, P1 equals P2, versus H1, that P1 does not equal P2. Or the test can be conducted for HO, that P1 is greater than or equal to P2, versus H1, that P1 is less than P2. Or the test can be conducted with HO, P1 is less than or equal to P2, versus H1, that P1 is greater than P2. So once the selected pair of the HO and H1 is stated, we can then select the alpha, the level of significance. Unless there exists a compelling reason to do so otherwise, hypothesis testing procedures are conducted using the customary 5% level of significance, or 0.05 decimal. Now, after the two random samples from the corresponding two populations have been collected, and the sample results, x1 and x2, and the sample sizes, n1 and n2, have been determined, the 2prop z-test command on the TI-84 calculator will calculate the desired p-value for the hypothesis test procedure. Now this is done by pressing Stat, arrow over to the Test menu, and arrow down till the cursor is next to 2prop z-test. We press Enter, and then we enter the first sample data values, x1 and n1, and the second sample data values, x2 and n2. Then we need to match the inequality with the one in the H1. It's either a not equal, a less than, or a greater than. Then we down arrow to calculate and press Enter to select. And the 2prop z-test command displays several results. But the result we need to reach our decision is the p-value. That's the one that says p equals. And this p-value can be used to reach our conclusion. But be careful, there are also P1 hats displayed, which is the first sample proportion. A P2 hat is displayed, which is the second sample proportion. And the P hat, which is just the overall proportion. The p-value is the one that just says p equals, and that's the one we need to reach our conclusion. Now, this formula here is the standard score for the difference in two sample proportions, and it is used as the test statistic for the hypothesis testing procedure. The corresponding p-value is calculated using the results of the central limit theorem. Therefore, in order for the normal approximation to be reasonable, both sample sizes must be sufficiently large. That is, both the n1 and the n2 must be greater than 30. With sample proportions, smaller sample sizes do not produce reasonable approximations. Therefore, this procedure is never used with small sample sizes. Now, the calculated p-value is used to reach a decision regarding the validity of the form of the hypothesis indicated in HO. Small p-values provide sample evidence contradicting HO. Large p-values provide sample evidence consistent with HO. Now, when HO is rejected, that is, when the p-value is less than or equal to alpha, the form of the hypothesis expressed in HO is considered invalid. Consequently, the form of the hypothesis expressed in H1, which is the opposite of HO, is considered valid. When HO is not rejected, that is, when the p-value is not less than or equal to alpha, the form of the hypothesis expressed in HO cannot be dismissed, and careful consideration must be given when interpreting this decision. That's because either HO cannot be rejected because HO is valid, or because there is not enough sample evidence to clearly indicate that HO is indeed invalid. So, based on the interpretation of the decision reached in the hypothesis testing procedure, that is, whether we reject HO or we do not reject HO, an appropriate conclusion can be stated in terms of the issue under investigation. That is, we need to use words of the problem to address the original question and state our conclusion. So the following examples will help demonstrate how a hypothesis test procedure is conducted for two population proportions.